The studio lights dimmed slowly as the countdown hit 0. The booming voice of the moderator echoed. Tonight, a conversation America didn't know it needed. On the left side of the stage stood Denzel Washington, dressed in a classic charcoal gray suit with a subtle pinstripe. His posture was grounded, calm, as if he carried 1,000 stories in his silence. His hands rested lightly in front of him, fingers interlocked. He had that unmistakable presence, a man who'd seen too much to be shaken by noise. Across from him, standing with controlled defiance, was Karoline Leavitt, the youngest face of a rising conservative movement. She wore a crisp white blazer, arms crossed, chin raised with a confidence that bordered on challenge. Her presence screamed, "I'm not here to be lectured." The contrast was cinematic, seasoned experience versus sharp ambition. The moderator cleared his throat. "Let's begin where the nation is most divided: race, responsibility, and identity." Karoline moved first. "I'm tired of people using history as a crutch," she said, her voice firm. "We're in 2025, not 1965. This endless obsession with oppression is holding this country back." A murmur rippled through the audience. Denzel didn't blink. He slowly leaned forward, his voice calm, but resonating like thunder. "And I'm tired of people pretending struggle doesn't leave scars just because they weren't there to feel them." Karoline smirked. "Victimhood doesn't equal virtue, Mr. Washington." Denzel exhaled, not out of anger, but restraint. He looked her in the eyes. "No one's asking for virtue. We're asking for memory." The moderator raised his hand, sensing the heat. But Denzel hadn't finished. "You call it obsession. I call it remembrance. The minute we forget what was done, we become what did it." Silence. Karoline leaned in, her eyes sharper. "That's poetic. But poetry won't fix America." Denzel's response came with no raise in tone. "No. But ignorance will destroy it." The room stiffened. The air between them wasn't just heated, it was electrified. And the real debate hadn't even begun yet. Karoline leaned into the microphone, her voice now edged with something colder than confidence: calculation. "You talk about memory, Mr. Washington," she said, "but some people are weaponizing the past to silence progress. We've built systems, education, opportunity, representation. But it's never enough, is it? Because grievance pays better than gratitude these days." A few claps rose from the back row, the kind that sounded more like provocation than support. Denzel didn't even glance at the audience. His eyes stayed locked on Karoline. "You think acknowledging pain is grievance? You think telling the truth is a hustle?" She shrugged. "It's a pattern. Victimhood narratives being sold like moral currency. Meanwhile, real problems, crime, inflation, border security, they get drowned out by identity politics." Denzel stepped forward, not aggressively, but with the energy of someone stepping onto sacred ground. "I've played kings and slaves, cops and rebels. You know what ties all of them together? Silence. When you're told your pain is inconvenient, your story too uncomfortable, you learn to perform it just enough to be heard, and even then, it's twisted against you." The camera zoomed in as his tone dropped lower. "I didn't come here to argue. I came here to remind." Karoline raised her eyebrows. "Of what? That you're still angry?" That line landed like a slap. The audience audibly gasped. Denzel smiled, but there was no joy behind it. Just patience, and power. "No," he said. "That I'm still here." A beat. Then another. Karoline tried to pivot. "I respect your legacy in film. But politics isn't acting. You can't just deliver a monologue and call it truth." "True," Denzel replied. "But I also don't need a teleprompter to feel what's real." A flicker of tension crossed Karoline's face, just enough to register. She reached for her water glass, and her hand trembled ever so slightly. The moderator interrupted again. "Let's shift." "No," Denzel said, still calm. "Let's stay. This is exactly where we need to be." And just like that, the tension turned into gravity. No one was looking at the moderator. No one was checking notes. All eyes were glued to the two figures locked in ideological combat. Not yelling. Not interrupting. But cutting deeper than sound ever could. Karoline tilted her head, voice low but firm. "You want to stay in this moment, Mr. Washington? Fine. Let's talk about solutions instead of stories. Because in the real world, people don't have time for speeches. They need policy. Direction. Action." Denzel didn't flinch. He walked slowly toward the edge of the stage, placing both hands on the moderator's desk, not out of dominance, but anchoring. His voice dropped to a near whisper, which somehow made the room feel louder. "My father worked 3 jobs and never asked for pity," he said. "He asked for fairness. My mother raised 4 children with a Bible and a backbone. That wasn't a speech. That was survival." Karoline tried to cut in. "And millions of Americans." "Millions," Denzel echoed, turning back to her, "who've been told for generations that if they'd just try harder, they'd be welcomed at the table. But the table was always lopsided. The seat was always rigged." He took a breath. "This isn't about guilt. It's about recognition." Karoline crossed her arms, her voice sharpening. "So what? Reparations? Eternal apologies? How long do we bow before we stand?" Denzel raised a single eyebrow. "You think acknowledgement is submission? I think obsession with race is division." "No," Denzel replied. "Denial is division. You're confusing discomfort with damage." The audience stirred again. The divide in the room was no longer ideological, it was emotional. Karoline leaned forward. "You talk about pain like it's permanent." Denzel met her stare. "It is. That's why we learn from it, or we bleed again." That line echoed. Hung in the air like a sermon no one could walk out of. The moderator didn't speak. The cameras didn't cut. For a full 5 seconds, the stage was frozen. Karoline sat back, her jaw tight. "People don't want to be lectured." "They don't," Denzel agreed. "They want to be heard." And in that moment, it was clear, this wasn't just a debate. It was a reckoning. A silence fell that wasn't empty, it was loaded. The kind of silence that waits to see if someone will double down or break. Karoline took a deep breath, her hands visibly tightening around the arms of her chair. "You talk about pain like it's currency," she said. "But most Americans don't wake up thinking about race. They think about rent. About jobs. About safety." Denzel nodded slowly. "And who's always been last in line for those things?" She leaned in, not backing down. "Struggle doesn't justify bitterness." His voice didn't rise. "It just explains it." That line hit differently. The crowd didn't applaud, they inhaled. Karoline turned to the moderator for support. "Can we talk facts instead of feelings? Because I came with data. Inner-city crime, fatherlessness, education gaps. These aren't because of racism. They're because of culture." The air turned sharp. Denzel stood, this time without hesitation. "Stop." Karoline blinked. "Excuse me?" "You just took every systemic failure," he said, "and dumped it at the feet of the people suffering from it. That's not data. That's detachment. But it's true." "No," he said, firm now. "It's convenient." Karoline opened her mouth, but Denzel wasn't done. "You're not speaking to statistics. You're speaking about communities you've never walked through. People whose names you wouldn't recognize unless they were trending. You want to win a debate. I want to protect a reality. The moderator finally cut in, sensing the flames. Let's cool it. But the fire was already burning. Karoline looked at Denzel like he had insulted her, not corrected her. So, only some people get to talk. Only some pain is valid? No, Denzel replied. But some pain echoes longer. And it deserves more than your policy points. It deserves presence. The room shifted. Even Karoline's supporters hesitated, not because they agreed, but because they'd never seen her defenses pierced this surgically. Denzel sat down again, posture unchanged. Calm. Still. You can argue with stats, he said. But you can't argue with ghosts. And that's when the crowd applauded, not because of who said it, but because they felt it. Karoline adjusted the collar of her blazer, visibly rattled but trying not to show it. She forced a half-smile, the kind that politicians wear when they realize they're bleeding and the cameras are still rolling. Look, she began, her tone softer but no less defiant. I didn't come here to invalidate your experience. But when people keep pointing fingers at the past, they forget who's holding the pen for the future. Denzel gave a slow nod, absorbing her words before speaking. It's a nice line, he said. But the pen's still in the same hands. They just changed the ink. The audience chuckled quietly, not out of humor, but recognition. Karoline crossed her legs, her voice tightening. So what's your solution? Perpetual guilt? Public confessions? Denzel leaned in. Not guilt. Growth. And not confession, confrontation. The kind that costs you something. She blinked, caught off guard. He continued. You stand here with polished sound bites and platform-tested lines. I stand here with bloodlines. Karoline opened her mouth, then closed it again. I'm not angry, Denzel said. I'm awake. And that's what scares people the most, a man who knows both history and his worth. The moderator tried to reset. Let's pivot to education. No, Denzel interrupted, eyes still locked on Karoline. Let's finish this lesson first. He turned to the audience now. They call it playing the victim. I call it surviving the villain. Karoline couldn't help herself. You think I'm the villain? No, he replied calmly. But you're reading her script. The crowd exploded. Gasps, laughter, claps, a perfect storm of reaction. Karoline's face flushed, not from embarrassment, but realization. Denzel looked down for a moment, then back up. Truth doesn't need applause, he said. But lies sure do need defense. Even the moderator stayed silent now. The moment had outgrown moderation. Karoline finally leaned back, blinking hard, as if trying to remind herself what she believed before this conversation started. And Denzel? He didn't gloat. He didn't celebrate. He just sat still, like a man who'd seen the war before the camera ever turned on. Karoline sat frozen for a moment, the kind of stillness that doesn't come from peace, but from internal chaos. Her eyes scanned the studio lights, the silent teleprompter, the dozens of eyes locked on her. This wasn't the debate she expected. And certainly not the Denzel she expected. I'm not your enemy, she finally said, carefully. But I won't be bullied into silence by someone with a louder voice or a bigger following. Denzel didn't blink. Then speak. But don't expect silence in return. She sat forward again, teeth clenched. The moment someone challenges the narrative, they get labeled racist, privileged, ignorant. No, Denzel said, calm but unmistakably sharp. They get examined. And that scares people who've never had to explain themselves before. The audience murmured, a mix of approval and discomfort. You could hear the oxygen in the room thinning. Karoline raised her voice just slightly. I came from a working-class family. I waited tables. I paid my way through college. I don't owe anyone an apology for being successful. You don't, Denzel nodded. But don't use your climb to spit on the ones still on the staircase. Boom. That line didn't just land, it pierced. Someone in the back whispered, "Damn." Karoline visibly tensed. Why do you assume disagreement means disrespect? Denzel took a slow breath. Because some of us were taught that surviving the system is itself a rebellion. And when we speak up, it's treated like an offense, not a perspective. She shook her head. You're twisting this. No, he said, steady as stone. I'm unfolding it. Another ripple of reaction. Someone clapped once, awkwardly, then stopped, unsure if it was appropriate. The moderator leaned in again. Perhaps we should return to the original topic. But Denzel waved him off, still focused on Karoline. No need. We're exactly where we were always going to end up. And where is that? She asked, almost a whisper. Between comfort and truth, he said. And only one of them makes you free. The crowd hushed. Even the production staff behind the cameras looked up. Karoline's expression flickered, for just a second, into something almost human: fear? Doubt? Recognition? And then, it was gone. The mask returned. But Denzel had seen it. So had the room. The tide had turned, not because he shouted louder, but because he listened harder. For the first time since the segment began, Karoline looked genuinely unsure, not of her arguments, but of the ground beneath them. The spotlight, once her comfort zone, now felt like a scalpel. I just believe we're all responsible for our own outcomes, she said, her voice more measured now. Is that so wrong? Denzel didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned back slightly, letting the question hang. No, he said finally. But it's incomplete. And half-truths have a way of doing whole damage. The crowd murmured again, a steady undercurrent of unease and awakening. Karoline pressed on. So what, you want kids in the inner city to grow up thinking they're victims from birth? I want them to grow up knowing, Denzel replied, that their struggle didn't start with them, and it won't end with them unless we get honest about why it still exists. You mean tell them the system is against them? No, he said, sharper now. I mean teach them how to navigate the system without blaming themselves for its design. The room shifted again, that moment when you realize you're no longer watching a debate, but witnessing a dismantling. Karoline tried a new tactic. You're making this personal. It is personal, Denzel shot back. For every kid who was suspended for being disruptive, but was really just hungry. For every mother working 3 jobs and still can't make rent. For every father who never got the second chance your donors give each other at country clubs. Ouch. Karoline looked stunned. Even the moderator didn't jump in, he knew better now. Denzel stood again, slower this time, like he was carrying something heavy but sacred. You're not a villain, Karoline. But you're fluent in a language that was never meant for the people I come from. She swallowed hard. Which is? Deflection, he said. Dressed up as policy. And with that, he sat again. Calm. Clear. Centered. The silence after that felt like a verdict. Not a word from Karoline. Not a sound from the audience. Just Denzel, sitting in truth like it was armor. Karoline straightened in her seat, her jaw tight, her breath visibly controlled. The studio lights seemed harsher now, like interrogation lamps instead of stage decor. She looked at Denzel with something between frustration and awe. You know, she said slowly, you talk like you carry the world on your shoulders. Like your truth is the truth. Denzel responded with that same, unshaken calm. No, he said. But I carry it. And I don't drop it just because it makes the room uncomfortable. The audience stirred. A few heads nodded. A few eyes rolled. But no one could look away. Karoline tried to pivot. What would you say to a young conservative watching this? Someone who believes in hard work, in individual responsibility? I'd say hold on to those values, Denzel said. But ask yourself who taught them to you. And what they left out. She leaned forward again. You don't think values matter? I think context matters, he said. Hard work only works when the field is even. If you're running uphill while someone else starts downhill, don't talk to me about effort. A pause. Then Karoline, colder now, maybe people just don't like being told they're privileged. Maybe, Denzel said. But the truth doesn't ask for your approval. Just your attention. Boom. The line echoed. The camera angle changed to a close-up, Denzel in focus, Karoline blurred beside him. The moderator finally re-entered, nervously glancing at his notes. We're going to wrap this segment in a minute. But Karoline cut him off. I just want to say, I'm not here to be the villain. And I won't let this turn into some emotional ambush. Denzel slowly turned his head toward her. You walked in with armor, he said, voice low, steady. And I came in with wounds. But somehow, I'm the threat? That line? Nuclear. Even the cameraman whispered, damn. Karoline looked stunned. Visibly shaken now, not just by the words, but by the fact that she couldn't find her usual exit strategy. Denzel turned to the crowd, not to perform, but to level. People aren't tired of hearing about race. They're tired of pretending it doesn't still shape everything. Then he turned back to Karoline. Including this conversation. The moderator had no idea how to close. Because nothing felt finished. And maybe, that was the point. The air in the studio now felt electric, too charged to breathe comfortably. Even those watching from home could feel it, something had shifted. This wasn't a panel. This was a reckoning. Karoline sat still, blinking more than usual. Her fingers drummed quietly against the edge of her notepad. You talk like we're enemies, she said. But I don't hate you. I don't even disagree with all of what you're saying. Denzel nodded once, as if he appreciated the honesty. I believe that, he replied. But that's the problem. You don't have to hate me to be part of a system that does. Silence. Not from defensiveness, but because there was no good comeback. You see, he continued, it's not about whether you think you're a good person. It's about what your comfort costs people who never had any. Karoline's lips parted, maybe to argue, maybe to retreat, but no words came out. Denzel stood again, not for theatrics, but as if the seat could no longer hold the weight of what he was about to say. You were taught to believe this country is a meritocracy, he said, addressing not just Karoline now, but the nation through the lens. And I was taught to prove I deserve to be here every day. That's not equality. That's performance. Karoline finally spoke. So what do you want? Reparations? Guilt? I want acknowledgement, Denzel said. I want truth without asterisks. And I want people in power to stop pretending the fire only burns when it reaches them. The audience clapped, not loudly, not wildly, but the kind of slow, deliberate applause that means, we've heard enough to think differently. Karoline shook her head slightly. You really think I'm the face of all this injustice? No, he said. But you're the mirror. And right now, the reflections cracked. She sat back, folding her arms, not in victory or defense, but like someone slowly realizing she wasn't ready for the conversation she volunteered for. The moderator stepped forward again. We're out of time. But Denzel cut him off, without raising his voice. One more thing, he said. He turned to Karoline. You're not the villain. But you are the example. And that's heavier. The screen faded slowly to black, no music, no graphics. Just the echo of one man's voice, asking the world to finally look and see. The segment ended. Cameras shut off. Crew members moved quickly to clear the set, but the air in the studio clung to the tension like smoke after a fire. Karoline sat motionless in her chair, staring ahead, not at anyone in particular, but as if she were watching her own thoughts replay on a loop. Her team hovered nearby but said nothing. They could see it too, something inside her had shifted. Denzel stood quietly, collecting his notes, though he hadn't used a single one. The moderator approached him, nervous. "That was intense." Denzel offered a faint smile. "The truth usually is." As he walked off stage, a young intern intercepted him. "Mr. Washington," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "my dad used to say none of this race stuff mattered. But now I don't know what to believe." Denzel looked her in the eye. "Good," he said. "That means you're starting to think for yourself." She smiled, awkward but genuine. Behind him, Karoline finally rose and slowly walked toward the hallway. Their paths crossed one last time. They locked eyes. Karoline spoke first. "I didn't expect that." "You expected to win," Denzel replied. "But the truth doesn't keep score." She nodded once, then whispered, "Maybe I needed that." He didn't say anything, just gave her the same nod he'd given the intern. Then he stepped into the hallway, alone. But not isolated. Out in the parking lot, night had fallen. The streetlights buzzed overhead, casting long shadows across the concrete. He looked up at the stars for a moment. Then down at his phone. Then, he smiled. Not because he'd won. But because something real had finally broken through the noise. Sometimes it takes just one voice to turn a stage into a mirror. Tonight, Denzel wasn't just a guest, he was a reckoning. And Karoline? She was every politician who mistook poise for wisdom. If this conversation made you uncomfortable, good. That's how truth begins. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that don't just entertain, they challenge. Until next time.